Hello, this is Kim McAllister, and we're going to talk about research problems, purposes, and hypotheses. The point of this is to help you understand how to recognize a research problem and know what the purpose of the study is, and also to learn some things about hypotheses. All of this will help you in creating and formulating your research question for your paper. And we have a list of our learning objectives for today. So what is a research problem? Okay, a research problem is an area of concern where there's a gap in knowledge. There may be some type of significant area of concern for the profession. And it could be that there have been a few studies related to it, and you want to develop and delve into that problem and learn more about it. A lot of times in nursing, research problems come from lived experience, some real problems that you encounter on your unit, or maybe trying to learn better and more effective ways of doing things. They kind of come out of concerns. They could come out of, someone made this suggestion and tried something new and it was very effective for this one patient. Let's see what we can do to determine if this will apply to other patients, or maybe one particular unit came up with a new idea or a new method, and then the hospital wants to see if that will work in other places. These are kind of some common examples of where nursing research problems come from. So what is the purpose of the research and what is a characteristic of a problem statement? There's going to be some type of explanation for why there's a need. It could be a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs where they explain a particular problem or something happened. You want to find something that is timely. It needs to be something that can be applied to other nurses in other situations. We are specifically looking at problems that relate to nursing, something that nursing can fix, something nursing can change, or something that can benefit nursing. So while you may find other issues, you want to be sure that you're focusing in on something that applies to your nursing practice. It needs to be clear and concise. Not all of them are. So as you're looking at your research studies, you want to try to identify, did the research purpose, did the statement of purpose really relate to what the study was? You'll see that that's not always so. So you want to be sure that your statement is very focused on what you're doing. And we do that by using the PICO process, and we'll go over that in a little bit later. It needs to explain what the goal is. We're doing this because the nature of the problem is this, and we're going to use the results in order to. So you need this type of information. You also need to know what the variables were and what the population, who did this affect? Was this patients? Was it nurses? Was it inpatient? Was it outpatient? Was it home health? Was it in the OR? Where was it? Who was it that you were are working with? And the purpose statement should include terminology like the purpose of the study is to describe. The purpose of the study is to distinguish between two different groups. Or let's look at relationships between smoking and cancer. Let's look at the relationship between more time with the nurse and improved patient outcomes. Let's look at what is the effect of walking rounds on patient care. So these are some examples of how the study should be described. So there are different things that will affect the feasibility of the study, and that can be time commitment. It may be that the study is something that would take more time than the facility is willing to commit to. It may be something that the researchers can't commit to. A common problem when we have human experimentation, where we have patients that are participating, is that they will drop out. They choose not to continue with the study. So everybody needs to be aware when they sign up or get involved in the study how much time this is going to take. There's also limitations on money. We don't have an overwhelming, unending pot of money to conduct studies and research. This is why it's helpful when you're looking at your study, you want to be looking at something that's timely, something that's considered important to nursing. Oftentimes you can find grants or other sources of funding for your study if you're doing something that really is cutting edge or matters to nursing. Another issue on feasibility is what type of experience does the researcher have? Is this their first project? Do they have multiple studies? Are they an experienced researcher? Do they have expertise in the field? Have they published? All of these things will affect that. What's the availability of your subjects? Do they live 400 miles away and they have to travel to you for the study? Are they nearby? Are the times that they have to participate, are they at times that will work with their schedule? What type of facility do you have? Do you have a place to carry out your research? Or are you doing qualitative research and going out into the community? Do you have a place to meet? Do you have the equipment that you need? And then you want to look at ethical concerns. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have very specific ethical guidelines that we have to follow as researchers. And so we have to make sure that we meet all of those requirements and that we protect our patients. So when you're looking at the key factors of a qualitative versus a quantitative, a quantitative study is that study that's generally looking at 2 variables or 3 variables. It's very cut and dry, and so we understand what the factors are with those. With qualitative studies, you're looking at more of an area of concern or something that you want to learn more about. You want to get insight into the lived experience of a patient who has maybe diabetes and congestive heart failure, or you want to take a look at the lived experiences of nurses who have been the victim of workplace violence. You have to really know what the focus of the study is, because it's very easy to start chasing rabbits and splitting hairs in qualitative, because you are talking to people about experiences and it's more of a dialogue. And so you have to really know what your focus is and keep your eye on that. You also want to look at what the methodology is, and because there's different philosophical orientations for those. So these are some of the factors that are associated with that. When you have outcomes research that really needs to either refine what we know or generate more of what we know, this is going to be evidence-based, and because it's an outcome, it will be measurable, because an outcome is something that you have to measure to know if it worked or not. So something like that would be looking at ways to reduce pressure sore occurrences, or there's been some specific studies with neonates and pressure sores, neonates who are in the NICU. What type of mattress or what type of bedding do we need to provide neonates, and so forth. That would be an example of an outcome, because you're looking at which one reduced the incidence of pressure sores. What are the significant characteristics of the study problem and purpose? So the study problem should build on previous research. If it's something new, it's going to be a pilot study, or it might be something that's a grounded theory approach. In general, you want to have something that's building on something else. You want to be sure that what you're looking at influences the nursing practice, because this is the focus of our course. it will promote some type of theory testing or development, and it needs to look at what the nursing research priorities are. And you can look at the National Institute of Nursing Research and see what the nursing research priorities are. You can also go to AACN and look at those sites as well. So how is the feasibility of problem and person identified? Well, we've already looked at that. I went backwards, I'm sorry. So what are the critiquing guidelines for problems and purposes? So when you're looking at critiquing the problem and the purpose, generally this is the purpose statement is going to be at the top of your research study. You want to look at what the purpose is and read through that to determine if this is something that's going to work as a source for you for your paper. You want to have something that has a clear and concise problem, so you can read it and know this is exactly what it is. Is the problem limited in scope? You don't want something that has such a huge scope that you will never get to the end. You want to be sure that what you're looking at is focused on the problem that you're addressing. Is the problem narrowed to the focus of the study? Is the problem really focused on what it's actually studying? Does it identify variables? It should say the independent variables are this, the dependent variables are that. The population, this is where we drew our population from the study. It may include information on how people were recruited for the study, what were their guidelines for deciding who was in the study and who wasn't, and what is the setting? Is this happening in the community, at home, in the hospital, in a rehab situation? Where is this going on? Are the problem and the purpose able to generate knowledge? You don't want to be so esoteric in your research that you aren't really getting down to something that will be useful. Is the study feasible? And is the study ethical? So now we want to take a moment and look at hypotheses. What are the types of hypotheses? We have associative versus causal, simple versus complex, non-directional versus directional, and null versus research. So an associative hypothesis looks at the association between something, and causal says this causes that. Like smoking can cause cancer, or there's a relationship between exercise and improved cardiac output. A directional or a non-directional hypothesis. If it's non-directional, there's a relationship that exists, but it does not say what that nature is. In other words, is this going to improve that? Is losing weight going to improve your cardiac output? Is losing weight going to increase your energy level? That would be a directional hypothesis. Non-directional would not have this is going to get better, this is going to get worse. It's just going to link the two together. Your research hypothesis is what you think is going to happen when you apply the independent variable to the dependent variable. The null hypothesis is what happens when there's no relationship between the two variables. So in other words, if studying 2 hours will improve your test scores, if that's your research hypothesis, but studying 2 hours did not improve your test score, then the null hypothesis would be studying 2 hours did not improve your test score. Excuse me. What you want is a testable hypothesis. You don't want a hypothesis that only works in this one research study. You want something that's testable, that can be applied and used in the real world. It needs to be repeatable. It's something that can be done over and over again and have consistent results. So what are variables? Variables are properties or characteristics. They're things or situations. It could be diet, it could be exercise, it could be taking a particular medication, not taking a particular medication. These are all things that can be manipulated or measured in research. So you're doing something and carrying something out. You're either not giving or you're giving. You're doing or you're not doing. And so they're also something that can be measured with scales. And I don't mean like standing on the scale, but just have different scales that will weigh them or measure them. So the characteristics of variables is that they're more concrete than a concept. And also know that they can be used for, you can have several variables for one concept. If you have an independent variable, that's something that the researcher is going to manipulate. The dependent variable is the outcome, or what you hope is the outcome of the manipulation of the independent variable. You have research variables, what you're hoping to do through your research. Extraneous variables are variables that are out there that are not part of the experiment. And if you can't control them, then they become confounding variables, especially if you don't identify them when the study begins. And then demographic variables are your makeup of your study. They could be things like the age, the race, the gender, the socioeconomic group that your patient's in, where do they live. All of these things describe the characteristics of the people in the study. And this goes on to and gives you more information about these particular variables, and I'm not going to reread these. So operational definitions. These are definitions that you're kind of narrowing down for the purpose of the study. How are we specifically going to collect this? What is the framework? What are our outcomes? We're taking the variable and we're putting it into action so that it's more measurable or manipulative. So in order to operationalize your variables, you want to identify what you're going to be using within your framework. And then you want to develop a specific operational measurement for each variable. This way, everyone who's participating in the study will be operationalizing, using, manipulating the variable in the same way, and you have consistent results. So when you're looking at critically appraising whether or not there are variables or what variables there are in a study, first of all, they need to be clearly identified. So you should be able to see at the beginning of the study, the independent variable was this, the dependent variable was that, extraneous variables that were identified were this, and so on. And the variable needs to be measured in a way that makes sense with the hypothesis. And it needs to make sense with the framework, and they should all be operationally defined. Are the demographic variables summarized? We need to know what the variables look like, what the people were like, what the situation was like. And then you also want to know how were any of the extraneous variables or confounding variables, how did they interfere or influence with the findings? It's very difficult to have a study where there are no extraneous variables, especially in nursing, because we're dealing with people and we're dealing with people in situations. And many times they're in their own environment and we can't control those. So it's important as a researcher just to be honest and say, you know, we had this happen and this is what impacted the study. And then in the recommendations, you should see some remarks about those extraneous or confounding variables, because a researcher will make recommendations for a study for the next time, and they would say, in order to prevent this variable from happening, these are our recommendations that the next researcher should follow. Okay, so this should give you an idea then of the basics of what a research problem is, what a hypothesis is, how to identify the variables, and how to describe the demographics of your group. So with this basic structure, you should be able to develop a research question. I recommend that you just pull up a number of studies in the area that you want to look at and look at the way those questions are framed. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to do another short video on the PICO assignment, on your research question assignment, and we'll walk through that and how to formulate a study.